Alexa, stream Spotify in the Everywhere group.
All right. Here's Spotify on the Everywhere group. Resuming the weekly show with Jon Stewart.
The nature of a country that does what they're doing in Gaza. We're a country, they've now gone to war in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran. That's unhealthy. Their society is moving to the far right. I think there's a synergy between what you're doing abroad with violence and the kind of government you have at home. And so it's not just the risks of their foreign policy, it's the risks of what this is doing to Israeli society. And
what does it turn you into?
I have people I know who are like hawks, and they're like, well, I don't like what Netanyahu's doing with democracy in Israel, but I support, all these other things he's doing. I'm like, no, those things are connected.
Right.
He's consolidating what it feels like a far right extremist, political system in Israel.
Right. And a dehumanization of anybody that is needed. You bring up such an interesting point. And Christian, I want to get to this with you. He talks about the unforeseen consequences that royal future events that don't seem to be connected years later. And I want to go back to this because people don't talk about this enough. In 1953, the CIA, along with British Petroleum and the UK government, overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the democratically elected leader of Iran. They destabilized that country, allowed the Shah of Iran to gain control for so-called, because he was Western friendly. Did we not sow the seeds for this entire nightmare ourselves in 1953 to some extent?
As you know, that coup was the first of America's many coups throughout the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s. In Africa, Lumumba was killed. In Central America, all over. In Brazil, they supported military dictatorship. It was a dreadful, dreadful time, and it all backfired against the US. In fact, it's said, and I was there during this, the 1978-79 Iranian Revolution, they brought this up over and over and over again. This is one of the reasons that they were motivated to, rebel and rise up against the Shah, and also to essentially blame the United States in great part. Now, we've moved many, many decades on from that, and I think the high point was the 2015 JCPOA, because it's a very difficult relationship, and the United States and Iran were not yet ready to address all the issues. But I can tell you from my own personal perspective that as a reporter, I met with all these top-level Iranians for decades, ever since 1995. I was the first into the nuclear plant. There was a civilian nuclear plant called Bushehr on the Persian Gulf. I'm the first and the only one to have interviewed almost all the Iranian presidents, including the so-called reform presidents. Over these decades, many, many officials have said to me, background, off the record and this and that, and even on camera, that they wanted to make peace, maybe not the right word, but to close the file of conflict with the United States on all issues, on terrorism, on missiles, on nuclear and everything. And they wanted to get into negotiations. But as Ben knows, that this was scuttled many times by hardliners in the United States, hardliners in Iran, and hardliners in Israel. So that was never possible. So the JCPOA was the only major negotiation that came out of 40 years of this Iranian revolution. As you know, nobody in the world wants to see a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran says it doesn't want a nuclear weapon. Intelligence says it hasn't got one right now. It hasn't made a decision to get one. There was a time, and again, I was in conversation with a senior Iranian during the post 9/11 time in Afghanistan, and this Iranian called me in and he said, because there was the whole invasion of Iraq and all the rest of it, based on a fear that they had weapons of mass destruction, which proved not to be true, and we know the backlash. But this Iranian told me, yes, we did have a serious discussion in the leadership about whether we should weaponize, but then we decided not to, because that would make it much more dangerous for us in the region and in our very dangerous neighborhood. So they decided not to, and that's what intelligence says. Since 2003, there's no evidence of that. So I think that, you know, this is a really difficult situation between Iran, Israel, and the United States that requires not Trump saying I can fix it in 60 days or what did he say, overnight between Russia and Ukraine or
Right.
fix Gaza. It requires staffing, experts, technical expertise, and patience
He's
to
got one
negotiate.
guy. Witkoff must be a platinum Miles member right now. He's got one guy. Marco Rubio is doing 5 different. He's like the Secretary of State, the NSA. I think he's the ombudsman. He's the parliamentarian now for the Senate. Like they are understaffed. They doged themselves out of having any